What's up, y'all? It's Christine Pelaez, ADHD, bipolar type 1, nurse, and your host of Soul Centered, a mental health podcast about all things taboo, vulnerable, and soul searching. I normalize talking about mental health to know my true self and get soul centered. My dream is that healthcare and everyone becomes soul centered. Today, we are going to talk about very deep topics, suicide, sleep, and social connection. So first, before getting into this pretty heavy topic, I want to introduce you to a new part of my home. So this is I call it my seating area. Originally, this used to be my dining area, but I switched it up after my first cat died and I wanted to reclaim my space. And so I put my couch in here. My couch used to be in the living space, like where my bedroom is. But I put it in here and I got two cozy couches that you've seen me sit in episodes 1 and 3, I think. So I really like sitting here and trying to do nothing. Yeah, that's like a new goal of mine. It's like a new life value to chill, and not go, do, produce, and so let's see here. I have another plant here. This is a snake plant. It is a succulent, and I also have a candle here that is what are they called? Like not a memory candle, but a remembrance kind of candle. I'm gonna bring it out. Yeah. So in loving memory of Cipriano Godoy Jr. He was one of my best friends. He died unexpectedly last year at the age of 35. And so I still feel like I'm grieving him a little bit, but I do have this and his like flyer out. I don't know, just as a memory of a social connection that was very strong, right? I think and I'm going to talk about social connections today, just how important they are to life. So let me get into what happened to me recently. I feel like this is turning into a vlog, which is cool, it's whatever, but it's turning somewhat into a vlog. And like I mentioned in a previous episode, I get inspired just like throughout my life to think about like what topic to talk about in these podcast episodes. And so, okay, I thought I was gonna start work this week, but I didn't. I'm still working with the accommodations department of my employer to figure out where I'm going to be put for work. And so that's that. So I wanted to take a little vacation before I started work. And so I ended up picking an Airbnb in Sacramento. So remember, I'm in San Francisco, and I didn't want to drive that far, but with traffic, Sacramento is very far. Oh my gosh, so I got there, like I left on a Friday and it took me, I think 3 hours to get there. Without traffic, it's an hour and a half. So that's Bay Area traffic for you. I also have feelings about that too. See, I feel like I'm in a new phase in my life. Oh my God, I told my sister this. Anyway, so I feel like I'm in this new phase in my life where this is how I say it, can tolerate less. For example, like I can tolerate less driving. I used to tolerate driving 4 hours straight. Like I didn't love it, but I could tolerate it. And now it's just like I get so tired. And part of me wonders if it's a combination of my new diagnoses, like bipolar type 1 is a new diagnosis, and then also like the meds that I'm on. So I also told my therapist that I can tolerate much less sun than I used to. Like if there's direct sun, like if I'm out for a couple hours and there's direct sun, Like, I'm like, I gotta go home, I'm done, you know? And then she told me, she's like, oh yeah, it might be the meds that you're on, that you can tolerate, that you have like sun intolerance. And I looked it up and I was like, yeah, it sure is. I can tolerate much less sun. It's true, it's because of my meds. So there's a little bit of a sadness there, of course. It's like I feel like I'm not who I used to be, but at the same time, this is also something that I'm working on, expressing my needs, because it's very true, and I think this is very true of being a nurse, is like you suppress your needs, right? Going to the bathroom, you're so fucking busy you can't pee, like shit like that, you know? And so yeah, I'm in this other phase in my life where I'm like trying to prioritize my needs, which is new. Okay, so Sacramento, it was a lovely, it was like a lovely trip. One thing that I love so much about it was that, so it was definitely like a, you know, they called it a cottage. It was you know, an add-on, right? But I had a pretty big window facing the driveway and facing the neighbors. And this neighborhood is so cute, East Sacramento. They had brick buildings, like brick houses. And so I had this beautiful view of this, I'm assuming old, brick house. And you can tell that the owner had such great pride in her property. I say to her because I saw her. I don't know if she has a partner. So yeah, it was beautiful, and I just remember staring at it, like there were so many flowers in the front yard, and like through one of these big windows that she had was a wall, and then I later like kind of looked, and it was like I think the formal dining room, and it had like a yellow wall that had artwork on it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is totally my style, super cute. Yeah, so it was really nice. Like I would just sit at my dining table of this Airbnb and look out. And then the other property that I could see had like vining, like vines, vine plants like across its face. And I actually painted it. And I figured, let me paint it. Let me try, like watercolor. Let me try, because why not? You know, I have time. And I feel like sometimes watercolor is about time, but yeah, look, I did this. This is cool. Yeah, that's my cat, Pluto. Okay, yeah, so this is the vining. Yeah, see like the vining that I was talking about, the brick. Yeah, so this was my view from my dining window of this Airbnb. Okay, so why do I bring up this Airbnb? I bring up this Airbnb because I totally fucking forgot my meds. Forgot my meds, okay? And I think arguably, well, let's just say this. One of the most important things about one of my most important meds is my sleeping medication, Trazodone. So I didn't have that, and then I totally just forgot that I had, because Trazodone I'd been taking before my bipolar diagnosis. So I had an emergency stack, like in my emergency little kit, but I forgot about it. I forgot. Like in my mind, I was like, oh, I forgot all my meds, that we're just gonna experiment. Okay, I didn't really think about it like that, but I kind of did. So I didn't take my meds, right? And that includes my bipolar meds. I take 2 bipolar medications. I take lithium and I take Latuda. Latuda is said to have also an antidepressant effect on it, because remember, bipolar, I don't know much about bipolar, but this is definitely what I do know about bipolar, is it consists of 2 different like disorders, right? You have mania, which is a high, and for me, when I'm super manic, I also get highly irritable, and then it's also very low, so bipolar, like polar ends, like polar opposites, I guess you could say, depression. And this is why bipolar gets misdiagnosed as depression at first, because that's what shows up. And I got, you know, misdiagnosed with depression at first. So I didn't take my bipolar meds, lithium and Latuda, and then I also didn't take my sleeping meds. So I was there for 2 nights. So the first night I didn't sleep well. I slept maybe a couple hours, maybe. And then the second night I didn't sleep at all. And I knew that that was not good, right? And that's what my my program physician told me. He was like, if you don't sleep a couple days in a row, he was like, take extra sleeping meds because that puts you at risk for mania. And I was like, oh boy. So I got nervous, really nervous that day. So I drank coffee, and that's also, they say you should try to avoid mood altering substances, including caffeine, because I'm not exactly sure why, but caffeine I think gives you a jolt, and that could fuck you up, I guess. But I was like, I need caffeine for my drive. Like, what if I get sleepy on my drive, right? And so anyway, it was kind of sad because I intended on using the pool one last time before I left. But anyway, I was like, no, I need to beat traffic. I need to not be in traffic forever. And so I ended up leaving Sacramento at like 7. No traffic, which was great. So I got home in an hour and a half, but I was awake, right? So I was just like putting around at home here. And then I started to feel really bad. It doesn't matter what time it was, but I started feeling really bad. And what I mean by really bad is like I started overthinking. And I started thinking, and like, this is a problem that I also have, is like, when I'm alone at home, I overanalyze, like, what should I be doing? And should is kind of like a not great word, because it implies a lot of judgment, and that's something that, and it implies like some kind of shame, right? And we all know that I grew up with a lot of shame. That's very, very common tactic, I guess, in the Filipino culture. It's a very common thing, shame, and it's like super not healthy, right? So but I do this to myself, where I'll be like, what should I do? Should I be doing this, or is this good? Like, and then I'll put judgment on it. And that's also one thing that I'm working on. I'm working on a lot of things, and this is like very common for me. It's just like, I'm always working on myself. Yeah, that's great and all, but it also, I feel like, puts a lot of pressure on myself, which is very common historically for myself. So, anywho, so I feel like the antidote for that is to try to just be in the moment, but being mindful involves just having like one thought, working on one thing at a time, not being judgmental, and doing things effectively. This is per DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which I learned in program. So yeah, try to be mindful, which is really hard. And I feel like I actually journaled about this yesterday, like, that everything is like, change is hard, yes, and it's also, there's a lot of discomfort that's involved, right? And I'm so glad that my therapist said that to me, because yeah, so not trying to be go all the time will just inherently push me up against this urgency that I've always felt, like, oh, like, you need to be doing something. So, and I talked about this in the last podcast, right? And then, yeah, so then just having to kind of live with discomfort of doing something new. And so that's something that I journaled about last night. And it's just a good thing to remind myself, like, this is discomfort and it's not bad. It just means it just means that you know that you're like growing. And excuse me, there is this one analogy that they use in DBT, that's the lobster. So whenever the lobster needs to grow, or whenever it feels discomfort because it's outgrowing its shell, it means that it needs to shed its shell, and that's uncomfortable in order for it to grow. And so, yeah, that's an interesting analogy that I just needed to remind myself of yesterday. Yeah, okay. Back to, so I didn't take my meds. I'm back at home. I started feeling really uncomfortable. And I started overanalyzing, overthinking, and my thoughts started racing. I'm pretty sure this is mania. Like my thoughts started racing. I just couldn't get a hold of them. And it was just so bad. It made me feel so bad. It made me feel like I was a failure, and that like I just started feeling so bad. And then I was thinking to myself that I didn't want to feel this way anymore, that I needed escape. And then I realized that my thoughts started turning suicidal, honestly. Like suicidal in the way that like, I can't handle this anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to feel this way anymore. Like it was just so bad. So it's pretty hard to say that out loud. And I started feeling so bad, and I wanted escape, right? And like, thankfully, in that moment, because I'm aware I'm a nurse, right? It's like, oh wow, I'm feeling suicidal right now. And I'm feeling suicidal right now, and thankfully I didn't develop any plan to end my life, or it didn't progress to taking those steps. Because that's what they ask, that's what we ask as nurses. Like, have you ever thought of killing yourself? Have you ever thought of ending your life? Right? And then if the patient says yes, it's like, have you ever had a plan? Have you ever put a plan in place, something like that. And so I felt so bad. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't be by myself, that I didn't want to be by myself. I called my sister. I knew my sister was off. I called her and I told her, I was like, I feel really bad. She's like, what do you mean? Because there was an issue with the cat. I thought it had fleas and stuff, and I wanted to throw him away. And then she was like, is it about Pluto? And I was like, no, like, I just feel really bad. And then and she's like, and I was like, she's like, oh, what do you want to do? And then I was like, can you come here? I asked her, and she's like, okay, but it'll have to be later. And then I told her, why I thought I was feeling bad, and it was because I was in a very, very vulnerable space. So like, prior to calling her, like, I knew I needed help, like I knew I needed to do something. And so I went into my binder, my DBT binder, and I went to emotional regulation section, but really I was supposed to go to the distress tolerance regulation, because I was in distress for sure. Yeah, I was in distress. So I read it here that, like, the goals of emotional regulation in DBT, one of them is to reduce vulnerabilities to stress and distress. There's an acronym HALT, H-A-L-T, meaning hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And in that moment, I was definitely lonely, and I was so tired, right? I hadn't slept. And so this is why I bring it up now. This is why I wanted to talk about in this episode, the connections between suicide, sleep, and social connections. Because, and it even says there, and I felt it, I lived it. It's like I hadn't slept. And also, of course, I think another vulnerability is my diagnosis, right? Like, I hadn't been on my meds, and I am prone to depression, right? And so, and what I've also noticed from from being in programs, being hospitalized. First of all, like my roommate like had a history of not sleeping, and then she was there because she was suicidal on and off, and so there's a connection there, right? And then also it's like there's this like real connection, like between getting good sleep and being depressed, I'm gonna say, and suicidal. And then also I make this connection with social connections, because when I first needed to be hospitalized, I couldn't be by myself. That was like one of the kind of, I don't know, criteria or prerequisites for me going into the hospital, is that like I just couldn't be by myself. I couldn't be alone, and that's why I tried staying with my my good friend Joyce, you know. And then same thing here. It's like I felt really lonely, and I felt very alone, and that's why I called my sister. And I'm so grateful that my sister. What would I have done? I guess I would have if. Oh, but my sister also told me, like, please get some sleep. Please take a nap before I get there. And I was like, oh, and that was good. And I don't know if I felt better that she was gonna come, and or that I actually ended up taking a nap. But I don't know if I actually slept any. Anyway, yeah. So we definitely don't talk about suicide, right? And suicide, everything is a spectrum, but I just wanted to talk about like how those. So so for me, what were my prerequisites for disaster, for suicidal thinking, right? It's that I hadn't taken my meds, I hadn't slept, I was lonely, and I drank caffeine. I think caffeine just like is not good when. So really bad. Yeah, and then that's why I think that's why they have the suicide hotline, is probably when you're suicidal. And this is what I'm kind of, I have gratitude for. I applaud myself on reaching out to my sister and expressing my needs, because I think it could have been kind of easy for me to just, who knows, gone down this dark hole by myself. And I very easily could have been hospitalized in that moment. Yeah, so I'm glad I wasn't. Yeah, I'm glad that I recognized, and my sister recognized, like, you need to sleep, like you need to take a nap. Okay, so now I want to kind of talk about, this book that a friend got me. So a friend, when I was in grad school, in nurse practitioner school, I got really low. And that's when I was diagnosed with depression and put on antidepressants. But he gave me this book that I haven't read, but I think it's interesting to talk about now. So it's Johann Hari, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. So it's a New York Times bestseller, so I'm sure it's very good. But here, I just looked into the contents because it says like the solutions, there's like 9 solutions. And I'll just read them to you. Cause 1, disconnection from meaningful work. Cause 2, disconnection from other people. So yeah, I think, and actually I won't read all of them. Okay, so yeah, disconnection from other people. So I think that's why, like it's so important to have meaningful connections. And it's so, like, I think it's so sad that I think because life is so go, 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 and everyone is so busy that we feel like a hindrance. We feel like we don't want to burden somebody with, or our friends even, our loved ones, with trying to connect, right? And like, I have a best friend who experienced very real postpartum depression, and I always talk about postpartum depression when someone is pregnant because it's so real. Like, and postpartum depression, you know, is, when we talk about depression, like, the scary part about depression is the risk for suicide, right? And this is what I'm talking about here. And so my friend told me after the fact, and that makes me, you know, that makes me sad, because as a friend, you want to be there and support your friend, like in a time of need. And so, you know, I was sad when my friend told me after the fact that she experienced suicidal thoughts when she was having postpartum depression. And so, and same thing when she heard that I was feeling so horribly, it's like, please reach out, is what she said to me, you know? But we don't do that. I feel like what I did to my sister, reach out in times of super bad distress, doesn't happen. We don't do that. We think we're a burden, so we just make ourselves deal with it, which is dangerous, right? And so, yeah, and I think that's why, like, now let's make connections to the world and how depression shows itself. It's like, you know, when you get, I don't know if you've heard, but my dad just got retired. He just retired. My dad just retired, and he's like, oh, you know, so my brain doesn't rot, but also, okay, so his brain doesn't rot. He wants to work part-time, which I think is a great idea. Yes, so your brain doesn't rot, but also so you maintain social connections, so you don't get depressed, right? So maybe you have a sense of meaning in your life. Yeah. And I feel like that's probably one of the reasons why work is good, is so you maintain social connections. But work puts such a bad taste in the mouth, because we're typically overworked, right? Like, stretched too thin, overworked, underpaid. Yeah. So, I always feel at a loss, like in terms of what to say at the end of these things. But I feel like, what was the point? Oh, just to, okay, let me think about what's the point of my podcast at all. To normalize talking about mental health. Yeah, we've talked about it. So yeah, reach out to your friends. Reach out to your friends. And sometimes I feel like I don't have enough friends. I'm definitely extroverted. And like, sometimes when I want to talk, I feel like I don't have someone to talk to. And I think I think introverted people may not feel this way as much, maybe, I don't know. But I think that's also one of the benefits of having a romantic partner, right? Is because you're with them a lot, and you can talk to them a lot. And so, yeah, I don't have one of those either. So yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess we can leave it at that.